But I think that governments, consumers, and but also suppliers have increasingly become aware, much more aware of the importance of, say, food security. And so particularly for highly perishable products, one can see it's sort of accelerated interest in the immediate attraction of very, very fresh, locally produced, particularly salad products, actually.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dick Fearman on the IFAMA 2020 Goes Digital platform. I'm talking today with Professor David Hughes. He's very well known, not so much anymore as a professor, but as a consultant, a business consultant, and an entrepreneur in fresh foods as well. He's very knowledgeable in trends, and we're going to talk about three topics. We're going to talk about horticulture, and we're going to talk first about this question. David, could you tell us, do you think that demand for healthy food, and that is fresh foods, will be enhanced by the COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, what's sort of intriguing about COVID is that it's clearly accelerated some trends. Actually, and it's decelerated others, but that's another matter. And certainly with regard to the increasing consumer interest in healthy foods, it's accelerated this. Is it that clear? Did we suddenly become consumers of much healthier food? Well, we said when we were in lockdown in many countries that we were about to. But actually, if we looked at our purchasing behavior in the UK, but in many countries, what would we raced out and bought snacks, high sugar, high salty snacks. So in our mind's eye, we were going to eat healthier, but actually during the lockdown itself, we didn't. What's happened, if it's hardly post-COVID, but as we sort of edge out of this pandemic, it would seem that products which are perceived to be healthy are in stronger demand, substantially stronger demand than they have been in the past. So, the quick answer is yes, it would appear that we're eating healthily. But, the question I would ask is, healthy for whom? Healthy for humans? Healthy for the planet? Healthy for society? So the question becomes more complex. And certainly pre-COVID, you could see this sort of movement towards the notion of a healthy planet diet, which was much more inclusive than just healthy for the individual. It's also healthy for society, for the environment, etc. Then, of course, the question that your question begs is, well, what is healthy food? Because, again, there's this perception that if it's fresh, it's bound to be healthy. If it is less processed, then intuitively it is more healthy. But I guess those who are in the processed food business would tend to disagree. Is something frozen? Is that less healthy than something fresh? Well, not necessarily, as far as I can see. So COVID has accelerated this whole sort of notion of eating more healthy. I think sort of intriguingly too is that wrapped up with all this, because what is quite clear is that we've learnt that the implications of actually catching the really nasty virus are much more manifest, much more negative if you're not healthy yourself. And so, for example, obesity is strongly linked to being really whacked on the head by COVID-19. And so we can see right around the world that the governments have been starting to be even more interested than they were before in the health of the nation. We've seen it in the UK that the strange Boris Johnson launched his obesity strategy 2-3 weeks ago, followed quickly by part one of a more comprehensive food strategy. And a lot of this focused on health and health of the consumer. And so I would suggest that as we judder our way perhaps to a more healthy diet, that we will see much more government regulation than we have had in the past. In particularly in liberal societies, what have governments tended to do? Sort of try to nudge consumers towards a healthier diet. But I think we'll see more tax, more sugar tax, possibly some salt tax. where's that coming from? I see that right around the world. For example, if we look at what's been happening in Latin America in the last 6 months, is starting with Chile, then moving to Mexico, is very in-your-face labeling, health labeling on food products, with skull and crossbones relating to whether there's too much sugar, whether there's too much salt, whether there's too much fat of one sort or another. And again, in history, I think in more liberal societies, no, we won't go that far, but I think we will. We'll move much more to heavy-duty regulation by government, because we're starting to understand the cost of actually our citizens being unhealthy. And that's been exaggerated, if you will, by the whole COVID-19 experience. So,
okay. Thank you. So there will be taxes on processed foods containing too much sugar and salt and fat. That is basically what the consequence of COVID-19 is.
I think it will accelerate what was already going to happen. And I can see it coming like a big tank towards almost all of us. Yeah.
And David, you told us it would also decelerate trends. What trends are being decelerated?
I mean, the quickest one that comes to mind, and it was a temporary deceleration, was our acceptance of plastic as packaging. I mean, quite clearly, if you take plastic as part of the packaging as part of the product, so plastic packaging, there is a movement, and has been now for some years, to reduce plastic packaging, to make sure it's recyclable, that it's compostable. But as we moved into COVID-19, people said, yeah, we understand the sort of negative side of it, but for the moment, it seems to us it's the safest form of packaging. And so we were willing to put up with it for a while. And we still are to that to some extent. But at the same time, you can start to see the reversal of that. And again, a huge move around the world to do something right now about food packaging, plastic in particular as it relates to recycling.
David, you told us as well, so health is on the agenda, but what is healthy food and for whom, et cetera, et cetera. And unprocessed foods are healthy, are being considered healthy. And there will be government regulation. Now, fresh and plant food based are considered healthy. What is the outlook for horticulture in and just around cities? Hydroponics has been around. Greening and feeding cities, greenhouses on top of supermarkets. Yeah. We're coming along. Is that a trend that is being accelerated as well?
Well, first of all, let me agree with you while I think about the answer to that sort of secondary question. That I mean, the fact of the matter is that vertical farming, hydroponic-based, has become increasingly fashionable, and it certainly was pre-COVID. There's an astonishing amount of venture capital monies going into it, not least in the US, with really big names behind it. These a big Californian-based billionaires see this as being the way ahead. As you point out, of course, hydroponics has been with us for years and years and years. In fact, I had a hydroponics business 30 years ago, and it was sort of Dutch-based. The Dutch, in particular. Well, actually, the Dutch and the Israelis were strong in terms of developing the technology. So, has it been accelerated by? Well, the extent to it has would probably relate to food security. That, in general, I think international food supply chains actually operated really pretty well through the worst of the COVID lockdowns. And, to a large extent, we could get whatever we wanted after a little bit of sort of kerfuffle right at the beginning. But I think that governments, consumers, and but also suppliers have increasingly become much more aware of the importance of, say, food security. And so particularly for highly perishable products, one can see it's sort of accelerated interest in the immediate attraction of very, very fresh, locally produced, particularly salad products, actually. Because when it comes to vertical farming, it's difficult to get outside that relatively narrow band of horticulture and within horticulture salad crops, which do so well with hydroponics. So what am I saying there? That if you're looking at peri-urban farming, it's intriguing, isn't it? It's like going back to, the last time I talked about this or thought about it would be 100 years ago when I was an undergraduate and we were looking at von Thunen's peri-urban farming theory, and it suddenly appears to be more fashionable. But of course, the world has moved on since he developed his theory 200-300 years ago. And what sort of amuses me when we talk about urban farming in a sort of 21st century context is that I think it depends where you are in the world. So in Europe, we live next to our cities. Whereas in the US, we produce food somewhere else. Like it's 1,000 kilometers west. That urbanites in the US never see a farm. If you're in the UK, if you're in Holland, there's one next door, really. If I look in the UK at Planet Thanet, which is it's a Dutch type tomato, cucumber, pepper hydroponic operation of huge size, 90 hectares size, but it's 60K outside of London. And so, Americans would say that's in the city. And so, is city farming, if you define that as city farming, then, it can be a big deal. But in general, I think that the importance of vertical farming or hydroponic farming within or very close to the city will be constrained, first of all, by the type of products, as I mentioned, particularly for salad crops, unlikely ever to be livestock, I would suggest. Apart from anything else, most people don't want to push livestock into small areas. We like the idea of livestock being in fields, not in confined areas. So, I can see it. It's fashionable. It will have its place. In particular, as consumers say that we want hyper freshness, but with markets being more particularly, I think, high-end restaurant, very high-end retail. It adds to retail theatre if you have hydroponic units associated with the store. Ocado in the UK, which is a pure online player, is establishing vertical farms next to its customer fulfillment centres, or RDCs, regional distribution centres, if you will. That's a sort of nice idea, but I don't see it as being an important component of world food supply.
And the hole in the market, if I get you well, is in the US, because farmers are outside of the cities, whereas in Europe, it's not that much of a hole in the market because of COVID-19. No,
right. It's if you're in Chicago, seeing agriculture is, oh my lord, it's agriculture. It's actually the best example of the need for or where it works well would be Singapore, which is a city-state. And one can see there, it's that combination of entrepreneurialism, which is characteristic of Asian Singaporeans, but also the government saying that actually we need to have more control of, back to that idea of food security. And who's behind that often is not, again, because there's a Dutch element in our conversations, it's Dutch technology too.
We've been talking health as a consequence of COVID-19. We've been talking fresh foods in vertical farming systems and hydroponic systems in the city. In a second video, we'll talk about the opportunities for Dutch technology in the rest of the world with Professor Hughes.